If you're just joining us, some breaking news here on CBSN. 22-year-old Otto Warmbier, the American college student who had been held in North Korea and was released last week in a coma, only to come back here to the U.S., has passed away this afternoon. His family releasing a statement. CBS News White House and senior foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan joins us now by phone. Margaret, we're just learning the news about Otto, but for people that don't remember the situation there, he'd been held for over 17 months in North Korea. What else can you tell us for those who do not remember the situation?
Well, gosh, I'm thinking now of his family, to be honest with you. Having spoken to his mom over the course of their ordeal, they were just so frustrated and felt in many ways so helpless because the U.S. has no diplomatic relations with North Korea, and they got such little bits of information about what happened to their son during his captivity over time. And what we know is that Otto Warmbier was, in his 20s, about to graduate this May from the University of Virginia. He was a smart kid. He had a bright future. He just stopped in North Korea during a trip to elsewhere in Asia. He was there for a few days, and not only was he jailed and imprisoned, he was sentenced to hard labor in North Korea. That is an extremely severe sentence for anyone in North Korea, but particularly for an American. He's only the second American that I can recall ever having been sentenced to that. And for crimes that were really unclear, he was really just in many ways being punished. North Korean authorities said for that video of him having touched a poster and taking it off the wall, something that was viewed as having insulted some propaganda there. And what is so unfortunate is that he really got caught up in what seemed to be quickly worsening relations with North Korea and tension with its leader, Kim Jong-un. It already is a very difficult situation to be in, to negotiate with a regime or in any way talk to a regime which the U.S. has no official ties to. But then as tensions grew, it made it more and more difficult to make any kind of progress. What we saw in the past 2 weeks was essentially the North Koreans realizing the state that Otto Warmbier was in and wanting to get him out of the country. One can only imagine that they knew the extent of his injuries, and at least he was able to be here with his family in his final days, but had been in a coma for about a year's time. The last time that U.S. officials had received word on him was March of last year, and then suddenly received word, beginning of June, that he was in a severe state of duress and medical issues, but they really had no idea the extent of it until one of our envoys, U.S. Ambassador Yoon, made it on the ground to Pyongyang with two doctors with him and was able to have eyes on and actually examine what happened to Otto. And that is when it became known how serious his situation was and that he was in a coma.
Yeah, North Korea had signed the Geneva Convention back in 1988 and yet did not let anyone know about his condition. There are still, if I'm correct on this, 3 Americans that are being held there. What, if any, indications do we have then about conditions that they may be in right now?
According to State Department officials, when Ambassador Yoon, who was a special envoy from the United States, was able to land in Pyongyang and safely get Otto Warmbier handed over to U.S. custody, during that time he was on the ground, the State Department says he was able to not only get an update on those 3 Americans, but to have eyes on, actually see them and see what state they are in. You can only imagine that after learning about how severe the deterioration of Otto had been in captivity, that they wanted to get that level of assurance that the other Americans are still living, are still in good health. So the State Department will release no information about their status for privacy issues, but we are told that they are there in captivity and Americans have actually seen them, something that we don't normally have since there are no diplomatic ties. That last bit of contact with Otto Warmbier back in March of last year was via our representatives through the Swedish government. They have an embassy. We do not in Pyongyang. So on behalf of America, the Swedes went in, checked in on him, and from the timeline that has been pieced together after the fact, it was about a month after that U.S. representative through the government of Sweden was able to check in that his health went into steady decline. It is still not clear from medical authorities here in the U.S. who've had a chance to look at him. They haven't really said much about exactly what could have been the trigger for this coma. They've given a range of options, ranging from different, cardiac arrest related to respiratory duress, related to perhaps intoxication via drugs, or in other issues like trauma. They said there wasn't any blunt force trauma that would have made it obvious that he had been, beaten into this state of a coma, but it looked like he had been in it for some time based on the level of deterioration they had seen and neurological damage.
Margaret, did we get any indication from the North Koreans as to what they said may have happened to Otto?
The North Korean official claim was that he had suffered from botulism due to some of the food he had eaten, and that in treating him for that illness, he had been given some form of sedative and then went into this coma. What you heard over the past week or so, because remember, Otto didn't make it back to the States until around the 13th or so, and he had undergone medical tests out in Ohio, the state where he's from, and the doctors there had said, perhaps this is something that could have been a chemically induced coma, some sort of accident that had come as a result of the medication that had been given to him. But frankly, they're, trying to piece together a puzzle here. They haven't been able to talk to North Korean doctors. They had, when Otto arrived, he had like 2 scans that had been handed over and dated from someone in North Korea who had examined him. But as to the state of the medical care he received, his family has been public in saying that the North Koreans denied their son the best medical treatment possible. Had he been returned to the United States more quickly, certainly well before the year he remained in that state of coma, perhaps his fate would have been different. And they blame, in many ways, North Korean authorities for leaving their son in this state, which, as you can see, even with the very best medical care here in the U.S., they were not able to repair that extensive tissue damage to his brain.
And Margaret, as far as relations with North Korea are obviously already tense, what does this do to the already tense situation that exists?
Well, this is extraordinary to try to piece together behind the scenes who realized in North Korea that the state of Otto Warmbier's health was in such a state that he should be returned to the U.S. to perhaps pass on rather than allow him to die in North Korean captivity. It would seem that they realized very swiftly, given the fast pace that this diplomacy picked up, that something was immediately wrong. You know that from what the State Department has said, after Donald Trump was inaugurated, it wasn't until about February that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was able to start working on this portfolio to try to bring him home. And it was from February through June, and then all of a sudden you had one bit of contact in the spring months in sort of back-channel diplomacy. You had U.S. officials meeting with some North Koreans in Norway. It wasn't direct contact until New York City, June 6th, at the United Nations, when the North Koreans said, we need to meet with the Americans now to talk to you about your citizen, Otto Warmbier. And it was June 6th till now. That's how quickly this sped up. So we don't know exactly what was realized, who realized it, why the North Koreans decided that now was the time, but you can piece together what seems to be a sense on their end that something needed to happen quickly. In terms of negotiations, the State Department insists that is not underway. There was no quid pro quo. There was nothing America gave, they say, to get this young man back home. And we know that there are 3 more Americans who remain in captivity. And the State Department says time and again, please, as an American, do not go to North Korea. There are American tour groups who will sell you tickets, who will tell you they can bring you in and out safely. But once you are inside the borders of North Korea, American diplomats are very limited in what they can do to help bring you home. And as you could see, it took 2 presidents to bring Otto Warmbier home. President Trump, Secretary of State, was able to do so, but it was clearly too late for the Warmbier family to be able to see their son return to good health, something that perhaps could have happened in a different set of circumstances. And I can only imagine they're heartbroken, but have released in this statement that their comments saying at least he knew in his final days, they believe that he was home with his family and that he passed peacefully. But they are understandably so hurt and angered by this development and how their son was treated.
22 years old Otto Warmbier passing away this afternoon. Margaret Brennan, Senior Foreign Affairs Correspondent. Thank you, Margaret.